All right, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Practice Indies podcast. I have the absolute honor this week to have Danni Schaust on, who's one of our members, and I'm going to let her actually share her title, but this week we're talking about Sukha. Sukha is, you'll hear it in the Yoga Sutras as one of the two things that describes how we do asana, the actual how. So Sukha is ease in that context, and it's always coupled with sthira. Sthira is steadiness or stability. So in every pose, we're trying to find Sukha and sthira. But Sukha is also translated often in other yoga traditions, other texts, as bliss. And it actually, from the etymology, comes from or directly translates to good space, which as I was studying that, my mind just like fucking blew. So we're talking with Danni about sustainability this week, and I'm going to let her share in a moment who she is and what she does. But my loose link here is that I myself am a staunch environmentalist, or at least I think I am. I'm one of the nerds that has like favorite ecologists, because I feel as though if we humans really fell into our dharma or actively pursued our dharma with all our gifts, with our thumbs, with our brains, with all the things that we can do that are unique to our animal being, we could really create, air quotes, good space. We could really create bliss on this planet, or be in, I don't even want to say create. I think we've already been put in a perfectly great planet. But we could fall into or move into the bliss, the ease of what it means to be human and interacting in the larger system and ecosystem of this planet. So that was my hope of how we're going to gear this conversation today to align with Sukha. But Danni, hi. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Danni Schaust. Like Shannon mentioned, I'm a Practice Indie member for coming up on a year now, which is super exciting. Been practicing yoga, I think, since 2013. I think that sounds correct.
Feels good.
And so my day job, right now I work for Indiana University, and I run a internship program called the Indiana Sustainability Development Program. We call it ISDP for short, because that's a mouthful, and IU loves its acronyms. So I'm the ISDP program manager. Essentially what I do for this program is I do a lot of matchmaking and connecting. So I hire both students and I recruit host organizations outside of the university to work together. So basically it's a workforce development, talent retention program for students who want to work in sustainability and climate action here in Indiana. And I've been doing this since 2017 when I was finishing up my master's degree. So I have a master's from IUPUI O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs, and my master's degree is in environmental policy and sustainability. And I've been doing this for about 3 years now. Before that, I worked for the Indiana Recycling Coalition, and I've had a myriad of different jobs in the sustainability field. I've worked on food, I've worked in the green infrastructure kind of space. I definitely gravitate towards the nonprofit space. And I'm also a musician, so just kind of do all the things. But that's a little bit about me and where I'm at right now.
Oh my God. I've always had a girl crush on you, but now it's like, it's getting deep, because when you were talking about what you had your master's in, I mean, that is like, those are next level dreams for me, is to be
they are a commitment trademark.
So tell us, share what exactly is sustainability?
Yeah. So for people that know a little bit about it, there's a lot of these textbook definitions that we go back to. And I think that's great. But for me, what it is, sustainability is making sure that we have a livable planet and that humans and the economy can still thrive. So the simplest way to think about it is we talk about sustainability as having 3 pillars. So people, planet, profit. So making sure that the planet can thrive, making sure that people can thrive in the present and into the future, and also that the economy can also still be thriving, which, especially in our current time, is not exactly happening. We're definitely out of balance on things. So that's the way that I look at sustainability, is those three pillars.
So you just spoke to something that's obviously probably top of mind for everyone, but I feel like I heard someone who's a pain specialist say you can never actually remember pain, which I would argue with that at the birth of my first child. But I've been thinking about this time a lot because I keep asking my husband, like, is this the worst period we've ever had? Like, is this just like the hardest time we've ever lived through? And I think I'm saying that because I can't appropriately remember other times that might have been this hard because I'm just in it. But I do think we could all agree that this is a time of great unrest, and we are super out of balance. Even though I love my yoga practice and it has, I think if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be here. That's for sure. I'd be in the loony bin or something. But
Same.
but still, I mean, it is still not, it's not making this a blissful experience by any. If anything, it's made me more awake to how broken it all is. So I guess from your perspective, what is broken? And maybe from like a sustainability, what has this time period shown us is broken? And what would it look like for us to actually use the brokenness to get us into a place of balance or bliss?
Yeah. Wow. That's such a big
question.
Hard question. I think, man, you're right. This is a hard period. I'm trying to look at it as a period of growth. And just like you said, I think it is a period of awakening for a lot of people. So in my industry, when you work in sustainability and you work in climate action, you kind of necessarily have to be awake to the realities of a warming planet and the reality that, by 2050, it's just even locally, Indiana is going to be 5 to 6 degrees warmer than it was 50 years before. So from 2000 to 2050, it's projected we're going to be at least, like, the average global temperature is 5 to 6 degrees warmer. So that means that we will have winters similar to the East Coast. I believe Pennsylvania is the state they project, and that will have summers closer to Louisiana. We are in the Midwest. That's pretty significant. So I think it's hard enough for a lot of people in my field because we do have to be awake to the realities of what we're facing and the challenge that we've got ahead. But I do think it's an opportunity that instead of shutting down and turning ourselves off and just tuning into our own, like, personal, frankly, selfish needs, we want to help other people. Everyone I know in this field, they care about the planet, right? But in reality, the planet's going to survive even if it warms up. Humans might not. We might go extinct is the reality of this. And so you have to care about people because we want people to wake up and we want to be able to help them still thrive even in a warmer planet. So the reality is we're still going to live in a warmer planet. It's just a matter of how much and how well adapted we're going to be and whether we can start to, reverse or at least limit the impacts of this warming planet. So I think for me, it's uncomfortable just like any change is, but I think it's a real opportunity. And while we hear in the news all the gloom and the doom and, oh gosh, it's going to be so bad, I also see a lot of examples of really smart people coming up with really innovative solutions or rediscovering old solutions from old societies of ways that we can tackle these problems and still thrive into the future. As far as coming into balance, I mean, the way we kind of got into this mess, right, is like overusing fossil fuels. Like, that's the reality. We have got to get off our fossil fuel addiction. And I know that we focus a lot on individual behaviors, but the system itself has to change, which is going to take individuals demanding change from these big companies, from our utilities, from our government, to hold these companies accountable. I think it's the latest stat that I saw from the Sunrise Movement was saying that 100 companies are the reason for like 70% of fossil fuels currently being consumed and emitted. That is so significant. The way that we consume the things that we buy, the energy that we use, like those things are what is causing this. And so if we as individuals can start changing that and demanding more and better, we can survive and thrive into the future. And that's what I want. And I think that anyone in my field that really meaningfully cares about this feels the same way, that they care about not just the planet, but they care about people. That's why we're in it. We care about people.
Maybe you have tears in my eyes. Yeah, I mean, I am watching I've always liked to, have you ever done the Strengths Finders course?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of my jobs require it.
Yeah, I did it when I worked at Lululemon years and years ago. And I only remember one, which was my perspective I learn best by knowing the history of something. Like if I know where we've come from, I can go ahead. I think it's called like history or historian or something. Mm-hmm. So during this time, my husband and I have watched a documentary on the Dust Bowl. Ooh. And it was so good. It's on PBS. It's a series. If you think this is depressing, go watch that. Mm. And now we're watching a 30 lecture series from Purdue, actually, on the bubonic plague. And there was a warming period then. And that warming period was what enabled a population boom right before the bubonic plague, because they were living in, like frozen tundras essentially. And all of a sudden they have this warmth. So for a moment there, I was like, oh, wow, like what this does is potentially make more climates capable of making food in ways they couldn't. That was my like positive Pollyanna, but then it makes others a desert. So anyway, so I guess that's just me digressing. But what would you say as you talk about, individual consumer to these large 20 companies? That reminds me a lot of how we often teach yoga and how many of the philosophies of yoga are set up, which is going micro to macro and macro to micro. So what I can't do right now is affect those 20 companies in this moment, but I could over time, if I whittle away at it. What would be maybe the first 3 to 5 things you'd encourage individual consumers to do or individual people to do to affect the macro?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, and everybody's different. That's always been my motto. But I think for me, what was kind of my path getting into this. So when I first got into sustainability, when I was a wee little teenager, it was just becoming a term. Sustainability was a new term. The movement was kind of around, but it wasn't really cohesive. And what really helped me was thinking about waste. So in your home, there's a lot of things that you can do to reduce what goes to the landfill, or in Indianapolis case, what goes to the Covanta incinerator. So the waste to energy plant. So if you're throwing away everything in the trash, what amount of that could you actually be recycling? So signing up for curbside recycling through, Republic or whichever company is in your area, that would be one of the first steps that you can take. They send you literature on how to do it. They send you, a cart, just like you have your trash cart at your house. I think that's one of the easiest ways, because that's a continual process of awakening to, wow, so much of what I have is actually recyclable, and a company can reuse that and make new products. Another thing is composting, kind of on that same vein. So that's not possible for everyone in their backyard. I personally have a garden and I compost, but I live in a house. When I lived in an apartment, there's actually some curbside composting companies that you can pay to come and pick up your little baggie or your like little bucket of food waste on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis, depending on your needs. So even if you live in an apartment, that can be an option. I think another thing, and I'm focusing a lot on waste, but food is another really big one. So I grew up, My grandparents had a farm, they always had a giant garden every year. And really thinking about where your food comes from is another piece of sustainability. And I think it's a really important piece. I have a fairly decent sized vegetable garden. I think there's always more that you can do. But once you realize the inputs that go into creating your food, you realize how much food is wasted and how much energy is put into, kind of what we think of as our standard, like grocery store to home pipeline. There's actually all these inputs before then, and all these fossil fuels and water and labor that's put into that food showing up in that beautiful little package at the grocery store. And I think you have a much better sense of that when you start to grow your own food. So again, if you don't have a home, if you live like in an apartment, or if you're renting, there's a lot of community gardens or places that you can volunteer or sign up to, have a plot for a summer. So I think that's another really good way. I think that's 3 ways so far. I've got a couple more that I can think of. Think about how you're commuting and how you're getting around. So I go back and forth on this. I really like to bike if I can. I like to bike to work, but it can be too hot or it can be too cold. And so if not, I also try to carpool, or I try to take the bus. So just thinking about, your personal vehicle miles traveled, is a lot of our emissions on an individual level come from those single passenger vehicles and driving them around, back and forth to work. So if you can carpool with somebody, if you can ride a bike and get some exercise, or if you can take the bus, especially the new awesome rapid transit line that we've got here in Indy, it's a really great, super convenient system. So those are 4. I'm trying to think of a really good final one. And I think this one is maybe the most important. Ask questions and start learning. Start learning about what you're interested in. So right now I'm reading this book called Drawdown, and it's the top 100 solutions to reverse global warming. So I like to read a lot of different topics. I've got another book on deck right now that's about environmental and climate justice, which is an area I'm getting really passionate about. But just start reading and watching documentaries and asking questions and talking to people that are experts in these fields. So I think that's how you learn, and you become more awake to the entire system. Doing these individual things will just keep opening your eyes to all of the problems and solutions that are out there.
So good. Thank you. I think if we were to relate back to, this idea of Sukha, of bliss, of good space, what would be on the other side of that is bad space, or, being disrupted. And, when we look at this in the context of an asana, of a physical pose, and we're trying to find that balance of Sukha and sthira, stability and ease, what often comes up is like there's something disrupting the pose. There's something, so if we're talking about Sukhasana, easy seated pose, we're usually talking about either tight hip flexors, like we've got to get out of the way of the junk in the hip flexors, and so we've got to stretch to do that. Or it's the limitations of the mind that there's so much behind the screen, right? And I think so much of that just requires waking up and becoming aware of, and to your point, like becoming aware of how much you drive, becoming aware of how much you throw away. We can't move into bliss, we can't move into good space until we acknowledge the bad space, until we acknowledge where we are disrupted. So I think this is so important. I think as someone who is very passionate about the environment and has been waking up to this for a while, but doesn't have any of the cool background you do, I think it's just a constant awakening of like consumption. You said consumption a few times, like especially with children, how much people give us because they want to show their love. So they give us all these presents and toys for our kids all the time. And then what happens is they get thrown away, or we don't value used things in our culture. We think that's, bad and negative. So then I can't give the clothes to anyone. And so, then I'm stuck in this like cycle of consumer behavior. So it's really just, in my limited experience, becoming conscious of your own habits, but then starting to notice other people's habits. and starting to analyze where does that come from? And so often they come from 2 of the 5 kleshas, attachment and aversion. We're either doing it because we're attached to something or we're avoiding something. And, you know, and those are big things to grapple with. But I think at the heart of it all is when we can recognize we don't need all of that as we are enough, we will arrive at this blissful place. So it's recognizing that more doesn't equal better. You know, and I think we've fallen into this pattern, specifically in the United States, of more equals better. And what that always does, I think we have to remember too, is like when you get, I don't believe in like, there's not enough. I think we have copious amounts of everything in the world, but in that way that we go about consuming things, it leaves somebody else out. So every time I get something and I get to put my needs and prioritize my existence, someone else doesn't. So to your point about the food, like think about all the things that your food has had to go through to get to your plate. Just think about how many people that has affected.
Exactly.
So, you know, fair trade and shit, it's like, yes, it costs more. You're going to pay more for that food. But I often think about like who that might be benefiting, who that might be going to. And so while I might have to sacrifice a bit more of my money to that, what that means is I'm actually giving more to somebody else who did very equitable work to get that. So we will go down the rabbit hole of how politics and all this lines up, but it's all connected.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point. And I think that just thinking about consumption too, in your point about the United States, that's actually not an accident. The way that our system is designed currently is on part of the government and on part as a way to stimulate the economy. So if we can get that back into balance, there's a lot of good readings and articles in history about this. But after, I believe it was World War II, when all of the soldiers came back home, they were looking for something to do with all these veterans, with all these young guys. And so they started creating all of these suburbs, which created urban sprawl. They started really trying to help them raise their standard of living. And so advertising became a really big thing, like buy, consume. Like this is intentional. And the fact that things wear out, that the products that we buy wear out, is actually called planned obsolescence, and it's on purpose, which is to me really messed up now that we know better. But the way it was done was to stimulate the economy. So again, those 3 pillars, they were trying to get the economy back into balance and help people, but that's ended up hurting the planet. So that's just something too, to like a layer added on that consumption piece. We talk about it a lot in sustainability because it applies to literally everything.
Wow. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah. Talk about waking up. It's, there's a reason I like to thrift shop quite a bit.
Well, and that was intended to help people. You know, at the time, that was a really kind thing. And I think we prioritize kind and comfortable a lot over like real and, you know, in long term. I think that's another hard thing for us to recognize is like, well, instant gratification versus delayed gratification is very much skewed in my experience of this country. And, you know, again, macro to micro, we can't sit with ourselves in the present. Like we can't just enjoy this. I'm drinking hot water with lemon right now. Like I can't just enjoy this hot water with lemon. I'm thinking about the coffee I'm going to have after, and I got to drink this to get to the coffee because this is my Ayurvedic practice. But, you know, I can't just sit here, even though I'm having the best conversation in the world. My mind is already on the next thing, right? And then at the same time, we also can't temper our need for instant gratification, you know, to see the larger effect. To think about 2050, my children will be 34 and 32, you know, like they will be my age living in that kind of heat.
Me too.
You know, like as their norm and as they are trying to get their careers off the ground, if that's still a thing and whatever. So yeah, it's just really, I think we've got to grapple with how we can't sit with the present. If we could just sit with what is, if we could just sit with ourselves, that is Sukha, that is bliss.
Yeah.
And if we could also think about the long-term effects of things, the karmic ripples and causality of things, we might be able to create good space for more people for longer periods of time. So
yep.
I could talk to you all day about this, like literally all day. We probably should.
We probably will. I'm sure we will.
I think we really should and will. Yeah. Okay. Last couple of questions and we're going to practice. What are you growing in your garden right now? Because I know you and I share a love of gardening. What are you growing in your garden right now that you're most excited about?
Ooh, wow, that is a hard one. So I think it's probably a tie between basil and tomatoes because I'm trying to can for the first time this year. So I've done it before with my grandma, but I've never led the process. And I really love, we just always used to have tomato sauce from her garden. And so I would love to be able to like carry on that tradition and be able to sustain my own family. And I also just love pesto, and fresh basil is amazing. So I'm hoping that I have a good enough crop that I can do both those things.
Oh, love it. We should do a virtual canning party because Jessica Murphy asked me about canning and I can a lot.
I'm here for it. I need to learn for sure.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do that for sure. Okay. And what is your favorite like secondhand store in Indy?
Oh man.
I guess I should like clothes, secondhand clothes.
Yep. Yeah. So shout out to Aubrey if she's listening to this because she's like my sister in thrifting. But she and I, when we're in normal, quote unquote, normal times, she and I will go to First Saturday at Goodwill pretty much every single month and just go rip through that place and get so many awesome things because this is a well-known secret among like thrifters and people who are just thrifty with money. But First Saturday at Goodwill's in Central Indiana, everything is 50% off the tag price. So you get insane deals and we find the craziest nice things there. Like I found brand new dresses that were like $150 with tags on them for $2. So that probably necessarily
go to because I always go to the one by Target and I feel like that one's picked over all the time.
Yeah, don't go to that one in Glendale. We go to the one in Fountain Square, and I've gone to a couple of them up in like Westfield and Carmel, and that's where I found some of the craziest stuff. But definitely the Fountain Square one. It's closer to Aubrey and I. She lives down in Garfield Park, and I live near Fountain Square. But I have to say Goodwill just because it's got like a special place in my heart and that's how I got into thrifting. But there's also a really cool locally owned vintage shop called Rebel Vintage that's in like Sobro, and a couple of friends of mine own it and I'm like obsessed. It's so well curated, great branding. They make masks and they sell masks right now, but I've gotten the coolest things there for a really good price. So I got actually a mid-century modern ice bucket from there the first time I went in, and I was like, this is a problem. This is my new favorite place. So those are my two favorites, I'd say.
So awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for those listening. I did make her wake up at 7 a.m. to record this conversation. Thank you so much for getting up, for sharing your expertise, for being a person in the world who cares, for being a yoga practitioner, and definitely, you know, I deeply appreciate that that's here with us. So yeah, just thank you for all those things and for all you are being. If I'm not the ordained authority, but you are definitely creating good space in the world. So
thanks. So are you.
Thanks, buddy. Well, we're going to do a short little practice. Danny's going to join. I'm going to pin my video. If you're listening on the podcast, you can't do this because you're probably riding your bike, and that would be unsafe. But if you're not, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, we're going to make our way to our mats, just talk about our pose this week. So we are looking at parivritta utkatasana, parivritta revolved utkatasana fierce pose or chair pose. So it's a revolved chair, and Nicole will dive into this a bit deeper on our Just the Tip Tuesday this week, but The biggest problem we see, well, two, maybe three big problems with this. One is SI joint instability. So particularly if you are born in a female-based body, female anatomy-based body, then you may have some issues with your SI joint. If you've ever birthed a baby, definitely this can be a problem. So if you've ever taken a pervy lip and cock class, you'll know the cue to let your knee slide, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So that's one thing, is to consider just being safe with your SI joint. The second thing is just anatomy in general. If you don't have the anatomy to actually get your elbow across your knee, I see a lot of shame faces when a teacher will say, like, take your elbow to your knee, and that may not be possible with your anatomy. And I just want everybody to take the pressure off. Like, as long as you're getting the twist and you're in chair, you're nailing it. And I had a third one, but now I can't think about it. I don't know what it was. So those are two things we'll look at. Oh, the third is just using your core to actually make the twist. So often we'll like crank the twist with our arm to create leverage. That can be super unsafe for your low back, not just SI joint, but going up the chain, as we really want to engage our core to actually create that movement. So we're going to begin, as Danny already is, actually in a seated pose. Ideally, we're sitting on our shins. So Vajrasana, if you cannot do that, you can sit in a modified hero's pose with a block underneath your heels or underneath your butt, in between your heels. I'm going to go ahead and sit on my heels. We'll just do about 10 minutes of practice just to get familiar with the pose. So before we begin, as you take your seat, and I should say, final note, if you can't sit on your heels, can't sit on the block, then Sukhasana, bliss pose, or bliss this week, is also welcome. So finding your comfortable seat, lengthening your spine. Go ahead and close the eyes here. We're going to be doing a pose that requires axial rotation or twisting. And in order to do that, let's first just find the neutral position of our spine. So feel that slight curve in your low back. You may even take a hand back there and maneuver your pelvis to feel that gentle sloping occur. And allowing the back of the heart space to have its subtle rounding. You might pat yourself on the back to feel that gentle curving out. And allowing the slope of the neck, the cervical spine, to come back in. So a little S curve of our spine. And letting your hands rest on your thighs. Just find a couple of deep breaths here. Stabilizing or creating sthira in your tall, neutral spine. On your next inhale, open your eyes. Take your arms out to the side like you're holding two trays. We're going to turn over toward our right shoulder. So as we inhale, get taller. Exhale, turn towards your right shoulder. Feel how your core muscles have to do that work. Inhale here. Exhale, take your right hand down. Take your left hand to your right knee. Just gently encourage a little bit more twist. Now firm the muscles of the core. See how much further you could go. And then keep that as you take your hands back into your waiter shape. And inhale, come back to center. Again, inhale, get taller. Exhale, twist to the other side. Use the core muscles. Feel how your left oblique spire here. Inhale. Left hand goes down, right hand to your left knee as you twist a little bit. Notice where that twist goes. For many of us, it's going to start to travel as we add the arms into the thoracic spine, the upper spine, which is what we want. And then brace your core. Inhale, take your hands back away. Exhale, revolve. Take the right hand out to the side, keep the left bicep along the ear. Inhale. As you exhale, side bend. Worry about two things: the length of the left side waist to really expand beyond, and the contraction of the right side waist. As you side bend here, continue to go on the left shoulder, just slightly open. As you exhale, flex your spine a bit. So reach your sternum more parallel to the ground, your left arm more forward. And then take that left hand down. So your arms are about shoulder width, slightly wider. Start to bend your left elbow. See if you can hook your left elbow across your right knee. Take your right hand as leverage. Pull the right shoulder on top of the left in a little twist. If that's not happening, keep the hands on the ground and keep using the hands as leverage to lift the heart. You might be able to take the palm of the right hand into the left and create that line. So find your good space. Either hands on the ground, maybe left elbow to the knee, right hand on the ground, or palms touch. Take a deep breath in. As you exhale, bring it out a bit more. One more deep breath in. And out. Good. Coming back up. Slowly take this to the other side. Left hand down, right bicep alongside the ear. Big side stretch. Inhale. As you exhale, go a little deeper. Again, prioritizing right side length, left side contraction. And so we want to take into a twist all this length. This is what's going to help make the pose more accessible than just trying to crank ourselves into a twist. So inhale here. Exhale, take that flexion of the spine, reaching the right hand on the diagonal towards the front edge, as your left hand helps you brace and leverage to create that twist again. Engage your core muscles again. Inhale here. Either stay here, bring the right elbow across the left knee. Maybe the left palm meets the right palm as you twist. Breathe in for length. Breathe out as you twist. One more inhale. Use your core as you exhale. Inhale to lift up, and we'll take a reverse table just to undo the legs here. So maybe straighten the legs, stick them out. Place the feet on the ground, middle fingers point towards the sitting bones, pinch your elbows together, pinch your shoulder blades together on an inhale, lift your hips, stretch through your hip flexors, your shoulders, maybe the head drops back. Inhale. And exhale, lower your seat. We'll go ahead and come to utkatasana, standing forward fold, any way you want to get there. Feet hip width or slightly wider. For me, this is the first forward fold I've taken all day, so my feet are definitely wider. Hang out in this forward fold for a moment. Last deep breath here. Inhale, slowly roll up one vertebrae at a time. Coming all the way to stand. So there are two different foot positions we can take for chair and revolved chair. So let's first try with the big toes touching. And as we were talking on our conversation with Danny, if you weren't listening to the podcast, you're just watching this video, head over to our podcast, listen to the conversation. If you have been with us the whole time, we were trying to find that middle ground, that good space. And so if you don't feel good space in your hips or your knees with this, then the second version is going to be your go-to. So for now, big toes touch. If you look down, heels are about a fist distance away. We will often tend to collapse in the arches here. So if you find a neutral foot, try to lift up in the arch of your foot, try to press evenly to the ball mount and pinky toe side of the foot. All two corners of each heel. So notice if you're rolling to the outer inner heel, try to be right on the middle of the heel. And then bend your knees, reach your fingertips behind your heel line, lower your hips. On an inhale, stretch your belly off your thighs, your arms overhead. Now notice, because we do take a back bend when we come into utkatasana, the ribs will naturally flare. Can you tone the core? Because we're about to go into that twist, we want to use our core. Let's take the elbows wide here. Inhale. As you exhale, twist towards the right. Feel really crazy this way. Inhale here. Left hand's going to go to the right outer knee. Right hand's going to go to the sacrum. Feel your low back. So for me right now, my low back is stable. And in order to let my SI joint move, I would have to let my left knee move forward, my right knee move back. For this exercise, try to keep the pelvis stable and notice, right? We can awaken until we notice. And then start to hinge at your waist. Either the left hand is going to stay there, or see if as you tone your abdomen, thinking about how we started the class, you can bring the left elbow to touch the right knee. Maybe you take the right hand away and you bring it into the palm of the left. Hold here for 3, 2, and 1. Inhale, stand up, shake your legs out. Let's take the legs wide for a second. Interlace the hands behind you, little back bend. Drag the knuckles down, open the front of the hips. Deep breath in. Steady breath out. Inhale, rise back up. Let's bring the big toes back together. Take this on the other side. Exhale, bend your knees, bring your belly to your thighs, tap the floor. Inhale, reach your arms up. Exhale, elbows out to a cactus. Twist towards your left. Use your core muscles. Inhale here. Exhale, fold over the legs. Maybe right hand to the thigh, left hand to the pelvis. Inhale here. Exhale, maybe the right elbow crosses. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you keep both hands on the thigh. You use the biceps and the core to help you twist. Hold here for 3. Try to keep your knees squeezing together. 2. And 1. Inhale, stand up, reach up, separate the feet. Let's take the hands now to the low back as you take that gentle back bend. Open it up. Inhale, stand back up. We'll take the other variation, the feet hip width distance. So I'll show this from the front first, then from the side. So feet are going to be hip width distance. As I come into the twist, I'm going to allow one hip to slide back a bit, one knee to come forward, if I was feeling any junkiness in my low back. So taking hip width distance, you can also find this by sliding your heel to the inner arch of your other foot. As you tap behind the heels of your feet, bend your knees, bring your belly to your thighs, and then inhale, stretch your arms overhead. Exhale, let's take the arms long, right elbow, or right arm back, left arm forward. Go ahead, let that left knee sneak forward now. Inhale here. Exhale, hinge at the waist. And then either take your hands to your thigh or see if you can wrap that left elbow over your right knee. Now, different from the other chair, push your right knee against your left elbow. So it's no longer pushing into the opposite knee. It's creating good space here. Maybe the right hand meets as you twist. So just compare the two poses. There is no right, wrong, good, bad. It just depends on your anatomy. One more breath. And inhale, rise up through standing. Maybe open the hips on overhead this time. Exhale, tap the fingertips behind the heels, sink the hips. Heel the belly off the thighs, arms over your head. Inhale. Exhale, left arm back, right arm forward. Right knee will slide slightly forward. Inhale here. Exhale, hinge at the waist. Maybe you hold the thigh with your hands, using the biceps to help you twist. Maybe you hook the elbow. Get out of shaming yourself of what's good. Good, bad, right, wrong. Just be in the process, be in the practice. Inhale. A little deeper twist as you exhale. Good. On your next inhale, rise up, opening of the hips, stretch up. And exhale, hands to heart center. Pause in Samasthiti. Take your hands down by your sides. Close your eyes. Now return to that neutral spine. Notice how you feel. As you process this pose for the rest of the week, where within the pose can you find good space, sukha, bliss, even as your legs are shaking, as your core is tired, you've got happy middle space. Thank you for joining me today. Bring our palms to heart center, bowing our chin towards our chest.